I think I've always sort of resisted the idea of speaking about a book. The problem with a book is precisely that it has a particular language and inner code, and you don't actually, you can't really turn a book into a talk. I think what you can do is you can mutilate it. So what I've tried to do instead is I'm going to actually talk about what the book intends to do, and to try to draw out use some of the examples in the book to make a set of more general points. And the points are all about the same question, which is how can we be more intelligent about fighting poverty? Why is that a question? Well, the reason why that's a question is that, in fact, last many years now, but certainly in the last 10, 15 years, there's been an extremely strong pushback against the idea that we can do much about poverty. That in some sense there is a view out there which says that, let's basically not, so the most sharpest articulation of that view is that let's cut funding for all these kind of anti-poverty programs because they don't work. You can't help the poor. And I want to start from the premise that most of that comes out of many things that are claimed to don't work for very good reasons. They don't work for mostly the very simple reason that we never thought of how to do it right. So we started from the wrong premise, we implemented the wrong solution, then we look at it and say, oh, you can't help the poor. And somehow then that transfers the blame to the poor, because the poor are, they're the wrong kind of people, or it's too difficult to help them. And I want to make the case that a lot of that comes out of simply kind of thinking about the problem wrong. So what I'm going to try to do is articulate that thought elaborately over the next half an hour with some examples. The first example the first principle I want to articulate is a very simple one, but I think it's one that's often forgotten, and I'll illustrate that in some detail. So the principle is just don't assume the answer. So, and the example I'm going to give you is one where you save money by paying people. Let me say why. So here's to start the longer story, this is about immunizing children. This is a huge problem in many parts of India, more of a problem than we acknowledge as a country, because when we calculate our immunization rates, we actually mostly do it wrong. The reason why we do it wrong is very simple. It's very hard to know whether your child has been immunized the 5 times he should have been immunized. I mean, who keeps track of these things? I mean, in the US, your doctor keeps track of it. If you ask me how many times my children have been immunized, I have no idea. They have been immunized the number of times they should have been. So here, what we do is we go to parents and ask, has your child been fully immunized? And the parent says, yes. Why not? But obviously there's no, the data that's based on is entirely or mostly made up. So people have rightly no idea what the answer should be. When you do this carefully, you find some shocking numbers. Things have improved since, but in the early 2000s, we did this in Rajasthan. And in Rajasthan, this was everything in this particular part of Rajasthan, this is southern Rajasthan, everything was kind of in place. So it was not the case that people, the immunization infrastructure was there, the health centers were all there, every village had a health center, every health center had a nurse assigned to it, and there was a government supply chain of immunization. There were little cards that parents were going to have printed out where you're supposed to mark the immunization. Everything was there except the immunization itself. In fact, the numbers were shocking. Fully immunization rates were 1%. 1%, now that's a number that, so how do you get that number? Well, that number is as I said, is not easy to get. So you have to be pretty patient. You have to go to people and ask them. So after the first time you took your child, just after she was born, did you go back again? When you went back, was the child able to sit up? So you have to actually create the markers to get that information. So if you do that, you realize that almost no one's fully immunized. You get 5 immunization shots that in India we try to give people, and most people have 1. That's a fact to keep in mind. Most people have 1. Almost 85% have 2. So 25% have 4, and 1% of all of them. So it's really like it drops off very, very fast. And that's a sort of symptom of the problem. Now, when you ask people, this, as always, and this is part of the sort of symptom of the problem, everybody has a theory of what's going on. And they have an answer to this. So there were 2 answers that we were told must explain what's going on. So everybody had a general principle that they had already figured out. So the 2 general principles, one was that the government is the village sub-centers where immunization is supposed to happen, they don't work. And the evidence that people say that everybody shows up in the hospitals are crowded, and indeed the health sub-centers are not used. Now, one argument that elaborates is that they usually close, and indeed that's the case often. So one set of arguments people gave was that the government employees, they don't work. So and there was some truth to that. They didn't often, they were not at work, so there's some truth to that. And that's why people don't get immunized. So they're trying to get immunized, but it's not possible because the government system doesn't work. The alternative view was that these are beliefs. The other side, especially the government system, everybody said, and actually the healthcare system, most people said, no, it's not that. It's because these people have beliefs. They believe that immunization is not important. They have traditional beliefs. They are from a traditional culture. In that culture, it's not important to get immunized. Immunization is not something they believe in. Okay, so how do you ever tell? We had these two sides to this view, and you could just stay there. You can spend all your life kind of assuming one answer or the other. So one thing we do, this is as Parmesh mentioned, in MIT we run something called the Poverty Action Lab. What does the Poverty Action Lab do? Poverty Action Lab runs large-scale field experiments. So what are these? These are basically like medical trials, but on social questions. So instead of saying there is no way to provide, people have traditional beliefs and therefore they cannot be immunized. Let's ask the question, is that true? How do you do that? So basically, this project was a combination of 2 experiments, each designed to answer one of these 2 questions. First question was, is it the case that if you made sure that you could get immunized predictably, so you could always go and get immunized whenever you needed to, would that solve the problem? That's the view that if the government worked better, things would be solved. How do you do that? Well, we were working with an NGO called Seva Mandir, and Seva Mandir basically said, okay, we'll announce in every village that every month on the same day, so the 3rd Monday, there will be a camp, and their immunization will be provided. Government was very happy with that. So the government said, fine, you do that, and we'll give you all the immunizing, the shots and everything will come from the government. The government was willing to give us all that. So the NGO basically, then you have to establish a cold chain system so that you preserve but with all that, it was all figured out, and then the idea was that you're going to show up every month, and that was announced, pre-announced, so every village knew that it would be the third Monday or the fourth Sunday or the fifth, second Wednesday. So it was all kind of fixed, and then that was announced ahead of time, and we monitored it. So 95% of the time it was exactly on that day, and the 5% when it was not, they were already told that this Wednesday, because it's it's Ganesh Puja, we're not going to have the immunization. So it was done in a quite, I think, well organized way, and so that was one thing that they do. How do we look for the effect of that? Well, the basic idea of these large-scale field trials is that you randomly choose villages where this happens. Why you randomly choose villages? You randomly choose villages because by choosing them randomly, you make sure that the villages where this happens are exactly like the villages that where it doesn't happen. So 60 villages were chosen to have this reliable supply program, and 60 villages were chosen not to have it, and they were chosen by lottery so that you literally could say that these villages and these other villages are identical. Okay, so there's no systematic difference between. So that's one thing. The second idea was, let's go the other way, and this is something that I think people thought was completely silly, but we thought, okay, fine. If people have traditional beliefs and then they don't want to get immunized, then suddenly, if we offer them like a small gift to come and get immunized, they're not going to respond to that. Okay, so small gifts are, so the gift was a kilo of dal, which in those days was 30 rupees, 35 rupees. This is in the early 2000s. So, kilo of dal every time you come. So that was and that was again randomized, but it was randomized among the 60 where reliable supply was assured. So 30 got the dal and 30 didn't. And this went on for 18 months. And at the end, so this is just to show you that there were 3 different kinds of places. These were places where nothing was done. This is the standard government system. This is where the reds where the dal was given out, and the blue was where they were camped but no dal. And this is just the result of the lottery. Same. So here's what happened. So let me tell you. So at the end of it, in about 18 months, we went back to look at the immunization rates. And the first fact is important, which is that if you did nothing, they still went up. Things were going up. Things were, in general, people were becoming more aware of immunization, so things went up. The second thing is to notice is that the random choice was good because before anything was done, these were basically exactly the same number, 0, 1, 2. There's no difference. Exactly. And third fact is that if you assure supply, it only goes up to 70%. Even if you are completely assured supply, you are always guaranteed to get the person to do it. But then, if you give a kilo of dal, it goes up to 30%. So 1 kilo of dal gets you a long way. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you one very striking fact. It tells you that if you now think about what the cost for an immunized child. Cost for an immunized child, if you give them money or give them dal, is $27. This is if you don't. Why is that? Because the fixed cost of this program is to send someone to immunize. Once you pay that person, you might as well get as many people to come there. So, what the general principle I want to illustrate here is that you could sort of think about this whole issue in general principle. General principle 1, government doesn't work, so there's no chance. Second general principle, people don't want it. So people clearly wanted it because if you give them a kilo of dal, they show up a lot. So if they really believe deeply that their tradition would be entirely violated by taking these shots, then they would not have showed up for a kilo of dal. Clearly that was not the problem, and you knew that kind of when you looked at the fact that it wasn't. Almost everybody had 1 shot. So it was pretty clear that was not the problem. The problem was more that their life takes over. You have you don't remember how many shots your child has had, and all these things require discipline and memory and organization. And by the time you've had, you know, the 5th shot is coming around, you often have a second child who's, you know, needs to be, you know, is just being born and needs to be breastfed, and all those things take over, and therefore it doesn't happen. So you take that, so once you take that view seriously, then the sort of one other general principle also shows up, which is that, well, but, you know, should you give away money? Should you give away things to people just because they, turns out that, you know, if you give away money, you save money. So there's no, you know, there's a sense in which we sort of use general principles to understand things. When we actually thought about it, we would have had a very different view. Our inclination is to invoke some general principle or the other, rather than actually thinking about the problem at hand. Second, so that's one point I want to make is, let's try to avoid using general principles till we understand what the exact problem we're trying to solve. There is a general principle. It's not that general principle is not useful. What's the general principle we take away from this? We take away from this the general principle that people often don't, when people don't do things, it's not because of a strong reason for not doing it. They often don't do things because they forget. Small rewards have big effects. Why do they have big effects? Because people are not machines who can exactly decide that this is what we want and they go there. What happens, in fact, is, you know, you have a lot of, we are often sort of torn in many different directions, we pull in many different directions, and as a result, we often manage not to implement what we're doing. That's the general principle that we could take away from it, but I think the problem is a bit, we start from a general principle, and then we don't stop to look at whether that's the right general principle. Second thing I want to, second principle I want to emphasize is this one. Remember that the poor are human. Why do I say that? I'll say that. Can you hear me without this?
It's better with the mic.
I hate this. This is really not. I'll stand here.
Oh, okay.
I don't have. Yeah, that's on. Those things are very uncomfortable. I was not designed to be a rock star. Okay, so this quotation here comes from a guy we met in Morocco. This guy was basically standing outside his house, and we were having a conversation with him about his life. So first question, you know, what would you do if you had some more money? I said, I'd buy some food. If you had some more money, oh, I'll buy more food. So we thought this is a man who's really starving. And we go to his house and we see his flat screen TV and his DVD player and all that. And we ask him, what's going on? Aren't you starving? And he said, television is more important than food. Now, you could have said he's just being frivolous, but in fact, my view of this is that there's a very important lesson, and I want to put this picture up for a reason. Okay, so this is a woman who's selling. These were 15 rupee meals that you can buy in the streets of Calcutta. So she sells them. But the important thing that here is that, again, the point of this picture is that food. It's not just that food has nutrition. The point of this is that food has a certain color, it has a certain texture, it looks inviting. It's very important. Why do I say that? What's the connection with the television? I think all of us want things for reasons more than the mechanics of survival. I think that's true for the poor as for everybody else. Why is that important? Well, it's important because why was television very important? It's for a very good reason, which is that he lives in a village. if you ever spent an evening in a village, the striking thing about an evening in a village is how boring it is. And I've spent many evenings. One advantage of doing field work is you can spend lots of evenings in villages. There's not much to do. It is much more exciting for me because I haven't met these people. But those people, they sit in the same tea shop with the same mosquitoes trying to bite them, and they talk to each other, and they've talked to each other for the last 15 years. And there's not much to do in most villages, most nights, especially after the end of, maybe at some point in history there were traditional forms of entertainment which were much more available. Even those, my sense is that, I've been going to villages since the late 60s, and most nights in villages nothing happens. Even in the late 60s nothing used to happen. So I would say mostly there's nothing goes on. Television is very exciting relative to nothing. And it's very exciting relative to killing mosquitoes in a tea shop and not saying. And I think that same sense of the importance of pleasure, as well as everything in life, is very important in understanding a core puzzle we have in India. Problem in India is the problem of nutrition. So problem nutrition in India is very serious, and this is, we are the malnutrition capital of the world. 50% of our children are stunted and wasted. I mean, it's really stunning how bad we, with Nepal and Bangladesh, kind of are up there. We're really the malnutrition capital of the world. And in fact, that problem, if anything, we don't see a clear trend towards that being improved. That's one of the places where we're not improving fast. And that's because the share of food in the budget has been dropping at all levels of income for the last 30 years. So last 30 years, at any level, if you live on $1 a day, the share of food in the budget in 1990 used to be, 1985 used to be 62%, now it's 52%. It's the same income. These are not richer people. They're the same people. The people who are at that same level. That's a trend which continues. People are spending less and less on food. Why is it? So why is that happening? I think probably for the plausible reason that there are other things to consume. Now, why is that a concern? Because in some sense, from the point of view of many of these people, nutrition is not the only objective. We look at it and say, you need to invest in your children are growing up stunted. Their response to us would be, look, we have one life to live. If you deny us any pleasure in this life, maybe it will be great for, the nation that will have stronger people, but, we want to live a life now. And that's very important to recognize. So we are now trying to design, we have the right to food bill, which in principle could be a useful idea, but it's one that is designed under the premise that if you give people food, they eat it. Okay? That's the fundamental premise, that if you give people food. It's a nice experiment in China. I'll just go to that, which is exactly like one of these experiments I was describing, but it was done in China, not in Rajasthan. In this experiment, what was done was that a bunch of people were given vouchers, randomly chosen people were given vouchers to buy cheap rice. Basically, so they could buy exactly like the right to food. They would be able to buy rice instead of at 20 rupees, the way rice would buy rice at 2 rupees. So they were given vouchers to do that. What's the effect of nutrition? Nutrition went down. Why did it go down? Number of calories went down. What happened? These people immediately felt richer. Why? Because now they used to spend, let's say, 500 rupees to buy rice. Now they can get the same rice for, let's say, 100 rupees. So about 400 rupees left over. Now they say, look, we are so much richer, let's go spend that on other things. We feel richer. They started buying pork and shrimp. It's in China. This is what they wanted to have. So pork and shrimp consumption goes up, nutrition goes down. So this is, I'm not saying this is always what will happen, but it's something we need to understand. We need to understand that poor are not machine for turning food we stuff into their mouth into the health of their family. They are decision-making autonomous people who have certain views of what they want and they don't want. And unless we persuade them that this is important to do, we're going to not get the results we think we're going to get. Because they're going to, they're going to sell. If you give them cheap rice, they'll sell it to people who want it. They're not, you cannot make people eat things unless you make them want them. So if they think that a cell phone is cooler than food, then they're going to get a cell phone and not food. And that's not deep fact, but it's one that our policy completely ignores. The third point I want to make, which is related in a sense to the first one, is that sort of even most obvious principles are often false. So one of the ones that we talk a lot about in the book is about the way pedagogy has evolved. So the primary, the design of the Indian education system is based on the idea that content is the key element. So you need to learn stuff. The entire education system is built on that idea, that you need to learn stuff. If you learn stuff, then the point of the education system is to deliver that. In fact, the Right to Education Bill specifies that every school has to cover the syllabus during the year. That's a part of the Right to Education Bill. That's saying that content is the center. Why? What's the alternative? So that seems obvious. Why should we want children to learn? Science and social studies and all these good things. What's the alternative? The alternative is that what's the fact? The fact is that kids can't. This is the result from a survey in India, but it's a result from same survey in Pakistan. It's the same result from the same survey in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Ghana, in Senegal. You find the same fact, which is kids don't learn. So we started. These numbers are, so if you take people who are in class 4, 40% can read a paragraph, 30% can do a simple division. And this is a fact that we've now found in many countries. It's not just, it's not just in India we are particularly doing badly. Actually, we're doing better than some countries. Other countries do even worse. East Africa does worse than us. So, think of what's going on. We have to teach content. So in class 4, there is social studies. Most of these people can't read. They can't read a word. They can't. Well, what's going on? They're sitting in class. They're listening to something that's on social studies, but they can't read a word. So they don't understand anything of what's going on. This means nothing to them. And they sit year after year and then they drop out. And then we say that there's a dropout problem. Of course there's a dropout problem. I think of it as there is a drop-in problem. Why are these kids in school? If I were there, I would run away. We have very docile kids, or this system could not possibly work. I mean, it's just it's sort of a piece of child torture that's going on. Now, why does that system sort of exist? It exists. So let me skip this slide. Why does the system exist? It exists because we take it as given that the point of the education system is to deliver content. In class 4, and you don't expect them to be really doing social studies. How could that possibly be? Fact is that they're not learning anything. So there are other countries, like for example Finland, which basically says, look, till class 4 we will teach no content. We'll just focus on skills. We will make sure that the kids have some basic skills, and every child should have those skills, not just the top child. So our education system fundamentally comes out of a mindset which comes from a colonial system which was built on choosing an elite. And it was an elite that would then sort of be the agents of the colonial state. And those people were supposed to be well educated. The colonists had no interest in mass education. So the entire mindset of that system was built on the premise that what we need in the education system is learning content. And we have not updated that. Indeed, we reinforce that every time we do education reform, we put more content into it. A particularly grotesque example of that is a ruling from, I think, Delhi High Court, which said that children's books in class 2 cannot be more than, I think, 2 kgs. So they were trying to regulate content by regulating the weight of the books. This is the power of the danger of the self-evident. It seems right, children should learn stuff, and therefore it means therefore that we should have a more advanced education system is one that gives people more content. In fact, I think many countries have gone the opposite direction. I said, well, Finland is, if you look at the PISA scores, which are kind of the class 8, 9 worldwide test scores, Finland does the best. It's the #1 country in the world. It's an education system which is no content till class 4. Content is easy to teach once children have the skills to learn it. And we have completely reversed that process. We have emphasized content. So this is an example of something that I think is, so we've now done, what makes this particularly depressing is that it's very easy to teach children. The fact that the children can't read is something that we have structurally created. So we have now many field experiments. We've done probably 6 of them all over India, from one in Mumbai, one in Baroda, one in Rajasthan, one in Jaunpur district in UP, one in Uttarakhand, one in Bihar. So many places. Every place we find the same, actually 3 in Bihar, same fact, which is that if you actually focus on teaching the children, they learn very, very fast. So the best example of that was a summer school program, which was again exactly like these other things, was done as an experiment. Some villages had got a summer school, other villages didn't. The thing that was special about that is that the summer school was taught by this government school teacher. The same teacher who usually doesn't teach and has given these results. But in this case, he was told, don't teach content, just make sure these children can learn. Summer school ran for 6 weeks, and at the end of 6 weeks, reading scores improved very substantially. For all the children who went, reading scores, basically children closed half the gap between the worst performing child and the best performing child within 6 weeks. So it's an enormous gain, all done by the government school teachers who are kind of seen as the nullified element in the system. So it was not that they were not able or willing to teach. They were just told not to teach. The whole system militates against actually teaching children. When they were told this, your job is to teach children rather than teach content, they started teaching children. So it's obvious, but you can almost never, you can almost never go broke by underestimating people's ability to miss the obvious. It's just, the obvious is this right and left, and that's sort of an important, this seems, once I say this seems obvious. Till this, if I said, oh, you have to teach children science, you'll say that's obvious too. So, the obvious is often a very tempting place to be. Let me say give the last example. The last example is one of the most examples. Obvious. Listen to what people are saying. Why do I say this? Well, till recently, there was quite a strong view in the world that the way to fight poverty is by allowing the poor to be entrepreneurs. microcredit was the label of things. Attached to that, but there was a general, more broader ideology which said that. Now, that view, I think in my view, confuses two related but distinct facts. One is that the poor are entrepreneurs. Indeed, some of the most inventive people in the world are the poor. In our book, we give an example of these 4 women who used to sit in front of the Bombay Stock Exchange, and they would be apparently doing nothing. They would just sit on the sidewalk next to the Bombay Stock Exchange, and occasionally they would run into the street, scoop up something, and come back. What were they doing? Powder. No, they were drying sand. They were taking sand from the chowpatty, bringing the stock exchange, wet sand in the morning. They were putting it under the wheels of the cars. The cars were going over it, and the heat dried the sand. Once they dried the sand, they would sell the sand for cleaning, pots and pans. So sand is a very good scrubber, so they would sell it for. So they were drying the sand. They're very creative. That's very different from saying that they want to be creative. So, or that they want to be entrepreneurs. So, a question that nobody seems to have asked is, do the poor want to be entrepreneurs? So we did I'll skip all this and say, we asked parents, what would you want your child to be when he grows up? He's 15 now, or your grandchild. And we posed it in different ways. We said, this is a large survey. We said, imagine you got 50,000 rupees won in a lottery, so that people don't just think that, he has to do what I have to do. So I have some choice. I have 50,000 rupees, I could start a business. How many people said start a business? 0%. How many people, what did they say? They wanted a government job. Most people wanted a government job for the children. That's the standard aspiration of most Indians, is a government job. Why? Because it's predictable, it's stable, and I suspect they'll take a job in Godrej as well. But they want a job. Now, I'm not saying that we have the capacity to provide all the jobs, but we have to understand that that's a reason why so we did a randomized control trial, exactly these field experiments of microcredit in Hyderabad, where again neighborhoods were randomly chosen to get microcredit or not. So Spandana, which was used to be before the Andhra Pradesh government decided to basically shut them down, was one of the largest, was the largest MFI in India for a while. Basically randomly entered some neighborhoods and not others, offered microcredit, and we looked at the effect of that. So what happens? Well, people buy a lot more televisions and fridges. Some few businesses get shut, extra businesses get set up. Those businesses make no money. That's not a surprise if you understand. They don't want these businesses to make money. The only reason why they set up these businesses actually is to pay for the television. Once the goal of the business is not to grow a business and become a tycoon, it's to pay for the television. So if you have taken a loan, you have to do some extra work to pay for the television. They pay for the television just fine, then they don't. And there are now 6 studies from all over the world, one in Bosnia, one in Mongolia, one in Morocco, 2 in India, and 1 in Mexico, all find exactly the same thing, which is that people they like credit for usually some major consumption purpose. Microcredit is useful. It serves a very important purpose, which is the purpose of paying for your daughter's wedding, for your refrigerator, for fixing your house, all kinds of interesting things. Paying down a loan that you had from somebody else, which was at 120%, and now you're paying only 20%. So it's all good, but starting a business is not a big part of it. In the business, they tend to stay extremely small. They don't make any money, and that's not, as I said, that's not a surprise. There's not the driver. The drive to grow the business is not a major motivation of all of this. The reason why they take the loan is to buy the durable, and then they might do something to pay for it, or they might actually, run a small business. But the businesses tend to be very small, very predictable, very striking how predictable the businesses are. They always tend to be like, if it's rural, it's buying a cow, buying some sheep, buying some goats. If it's urban, it's a small grocery store, kirana store of some kind, or maybe a sewing machine. But it's a very, and these are very crowded industries. They're like, if you go to any slum in Mumbai, you'll see how many kirana stores there are. You just walk through Dharavi, you'll see how many kirana stores there are. And so margins are small. It's nothing, no surprises there. The margins are tiny, they don't make any money. So they don't make any money for the per hour, if you price time at market at the minimum wage, most of these businesses lose money. That's not quite fair, because most of these people, women probably wouldn't take a job at minimum wages because they want to also stay at home and do other things. But it's still, the amount of money they make is tiny, and that's consistent with what we should have expected if we listened to them. We imagined this whole thing because we were not listening to what they were saying. If we actually listened to what they were saying, we would have already known. So let me now, I think I've taken enough time, and I'm going to wrap up in let me wrap up in 2 minutes. So what do I have to say that's useful to any of you here? Well, first thing, you're all citizens, you think about the world. And I think it's worth always asking the question, are we trapped by the obvious? Are we asking the right questions? Have we done enough testing of the hypothesis here? Have we looked at this? Are we just making policy out of our pockets? And I think most of the time we find that we haven't done the due diligence. Second thing, I think, is what I think may be more relevant in a corporate context, is when you think of sort of what products people want, I think, and where you can do good. I think both of those questions are, first, they're related. Second, I think both of them impinge on exactly these issues. So what are the real aspirations of the poor? We can imagine the aspirations of the poor, or we could find out. We could imagine what's good for the poor, or we could actually think of what is the context of their life. And I think that it's a very important distinction between sort of a view of the world which says, I think there's been a lot of good done by thinking about quote unquote the bottom of the pyramid, but I think there's also been a mechanical translation of the idea that there are a lot of poor people, therefore there must be a lot of money to be made there. And a lot of attempts to make money have failed, because while there are a lot of poor people, they don't necessarily want what we want to sell them. So a classic example of that, I'll finish with that, is the insurance industry. So there was a big interest in the idea that poor bear a lot of risk, therefore they must actually want insurance. And a lot of big insurers went into either crop insurance or health insurance for the poor, and most of those people are either not growing or they're backing out. What happened? Well, they missed one, I think, clear. So so let me tell that story and quickly finish. That's on the next slide, if I can get there. It's not moving. Fine. That doesn't matter. I'll tell the story. The story is that all of these, we did another experiment on health insurance with SKS, which is another large microcredit organization. What happened in the experiment? Well, SKS thought everybody must want health insurance because they are subject to lots of health problems. And SKS liked that because health problems lead to default on loans. So they were very keen on that. The problem was that the poor really didn't want insurance. So SKS sort of imposed the policy that to take a new loan you have to get insurance. Two months later, we were talking to the head of Spandana, and she said, "I know you're working with SKS." I said, "How do you find out?" "Oh, all SKS clients are coming to us." So why didn't the poor want insurance? Well, because I think we sort of assume that we look at insurance from our point of view. There is risk and we have to get rid of it. Look at it from the point of view of somebody who's poor. Most of these insurances, for very good reason, came with a lot of excludables. So lots of things were not covered. For example, a lot of the health insurances were based on the idea that you will only cover inpatient. Why? Because monitoring is much easier. Inpatient, I can come and check that you had surgery. I can't check that you bought some medicine. So there were lots of rightly worried about fraud, so they clearly said this is going to be inpatient. Fine. Now, one poor woman we met, actually we didn't meet her, we met a friend of ours who was furious about this whole insurance thing. He was yelling at us as all we were doing was evaluating his impact. Why? Because her friend's husband had died. Before he had died, he had spent 20,000 rupees on medicine. The insurance company denied this. Why? This was not inpatient. There was no surgery. He had cancer, they gave us some medicine, but there was no surgery. He died. Or maybe he didn't have cancer. We thought he had cancer from the description, not that we actually knew. Now, the insurance company was completely right in denying it. But if you're poor, you think that, look, he was sick, I had insurance, he didn't cover me. I think this idea that you have to understand exactly the terms of the contract is one that you look at it from the point of view of somebody who's never had any contract that has ever been honored, has no habituation with the world of contracts, and thinks that what is fair should be done. Obviously, this looks completely awful to them. And that's the reason. The reason is all these excludables, deductibles, this is not covered, that's not covered. That complication makes the product completely unattractive to someone. Until we reach that, we're not going to be able to sell the products. And everybody who's gone into the market has found that either that they remove that, and then like in the RS BY program, and then you get massive fraud, or the other side where you get no take-up. And that's a battle we're fighting. That's a very good example of where, in many ways, if we actually try to understand what's stopping people, we might actually design better products. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I have loads of questions, but I'm going to straight away open it up to the audience. I trained all my life to be a rock star, but I'm just going to take this mic and give it to you. You just want to pass it back.
First of all, let me thank you for giving a different perspective to the queries which we had working in social sector all the time. In fact, this is amazing research-based perspective which gives us a lot of food for thoughts. Two things which I want to ask you specifically about the education system. When it needs to be skill-based, more problems arise because of the methodology also, teaching methodology, and we are battling government schools and other NGOs are working day in and day out to really innovate things for kids. Even though we say it's child-centric education, it's mostly teacher-directive in most of the cases, and that's why kids are not interested in learning what you want to teach them, right? And rather they want to spontaneously learn from the environment. So where you place that and how to solve that as a policy issue, because the broader framework which is defined by national the NCERT is recognize the issue and also has recommended many instances rather than being content specific than skill based, but it can't be seen in the practice in the schools. So that is one. And second, especially these research gives a lot of inputs to the policymakers, but I fail to see that the contextualization is not happening. What will be the solutions, especially considering these issues are highlighted by quite noble people like yourself, and how these contextualization would happen when the policies are framed? Do you see any way, or there is any positive thought process which is happening around that, rather than actually raising those issues? These are two questions. Thank you so much.
Abhijit, do you want to take a few questions? And
Let me take a few questions.
Yeah. So are there any more? We'll take. Okay.
After you design an experiment, how often do you get expected results and how often do you get very surprised?
Yeah, but I'm just going to go like, well, here. We take a few, sir. Yeah.
Oh, can you take 3 and then answer?
Yes.
Hardest will be good.
So on your experiment methodology, in the case where you had the vaccination, the immunization thing, we saw that in the normal case where no intervention was done, it rose from 1 to 6%. And this I had seen in one of your other papers also in corruption, that the very fact that you're going to measure something will change things, not just in the place where intervention occurs, but even in the control room. Just the fact that someone is coming and asking questions and wanting to measure something. So have you seen that in a lot of your experiments?
So on the education, to be honest, I'm pessimistic on education right now. I think right now the education ideology, I mean, you're kind to NCERT, I would not be as kind. I think NCERT has been a driver of increasing content as well. Despite their child-centric rhetoric, they have always sided with the teachers. And politically, I think they have always been, and I'm not very optimistic, because right now the education policy is made by people who are fundamentally so very defensive about putting pressure on the teachers. I know who they are. I really don't think, I'm not very optimistic. Maybe some states can just ignore them, but if you look at the directive from Delhi, it's all going in the wrong direction and has been going in the wrong direction. The right to education, the way it was framed, is absolutely all the way perverse in my view. I think it comes out of a bureaucratic mindset which basically puts, so the right to education is framed in terms of how much salary a teacher should be paid in any school. That to me is exactly the wrong end of the problem. I mean, it doesn't, if the teacher is not teaching, the teacher doesn't matter how much you pay them. And I think the entire mindset of the right to education is what building the child should study in, rather than recognizing that, in fact, there are many, if you go to like rural UP, you'll see that every village has 8 schools, including the government school, but like private schools. Some of those schools teach very badly, the others teach very well, but all of them would shut down if you actually enforce the right to education. And I think that that's the first order factor, which is that I think the mindset is all wrong. In Delhi, I think everything, the entire ideology is teacher-centric. They say it's child-centric, but I don't know anything to do with it. How often are we surprised? Quite often. I mean, it depends, and the surprise comes from all kinds of directions. Like, sometimes we expect one problem and we see a different one. Sometimes we just find nothing. And yeah, I think it's good that we're surprised. Otherwise, there's no point doing an experiment if we were always right. So quite often.
That's exactly why I asked.
Yeah, quite often. For the question of whether it's measurement, I don't think it was. I think it's a trend. I think I don't think it was measurement. I think measurement will have an effect, but I don't think that these places, the measurement happened 18 months after. So it was not, there was no measurement in this interim period. I doubt people have an 18-month memory of the fact that once some of them, a random sample of them, after all, not everybody was asked the question, a small